I have yet to walk alone in the dark again since this happened to me, and probably never will again. This happened about 5 years ago, and it still gives me chills to this day to remember it. My name is Marlene, and I live in a small neighborhood in a suburb of Washington, D.C. Really, I don't know why I chose to walk to the store so late that day. It was a Saturday night, and I thought it would be nice to take a quick walk and get some air as I was walking. I remembered that I had to buy a few things at the store for a family gathering I had planned for that Sunday, so I thought, why not at that hour? Around 10 p.m. There weren't too many stores open in my neighborhood, and the nearest 24-hour store was about a mile from my house, so I decided to walk there and take advantage of the walk to save me that on the next day. It seemed very dark that night, but the walk to the store was quiet and uneventful. Once I got there, I went inside, picked up the items I needed, and began my return trip. The street was dark, with only a few lights illuminating the pavement. The air was cool, and I could hear the faint sound of tree leaves being whipped by the breeze. I was not afraid, as I had walked this route many times before, rarely this late in the afternoon, but it still felt safe and familiar as I was walking. I noticed a person up ahead. This one was standing under a lamp-post and looking around as if he was lost at first. I didn't think much of it. After all, people get lost all the time. But as I got closer, I noticed that at one point he started looking directly at me and didn't take his eyes off me for a while. He was a man maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. He had short, messy hair and was wearing a dark jacket. Something about him made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I told myself that I was being exaggerated. I looked around to see if I saw anyone else, but the street was empty. It must have been after 11:00 p.m. and it was a residential neighborhood, so it was unlikely that anyone would be on the street. When she was a few steps away, he spoke. "Excuse me, can you help me?" His voice was quiet and low, not matching the look in his eyes, which were wide open and a little or too bright, as if he was trying hard to appear friendly. I stopped a few feet away from him, keeping a safe distance, not quite knowing what to do. I said half awkwardly, "Sure, tell me," trying to sound casual. But the truth was that my heart was starting to beat fast. Talking to the stranger was starting to make me feel extremely nervous. He smiled in a half-strange way and said, "I'm lost. I'm trying to find my way home." He took a step closer, and instinctively I took a step back. Something about the way he moved was out of place, as if he was trying to get closer without me noticing. "Where do you live?" I asked, hoping he would give me an address and I could point him in the right direction, but he didn't. Instead, he took a step closer to me. "Will you show me?" The way he asked, his voice was still calm, but with a hint of something else, like fear or desperation. I shook my head. "I'm not sure where you're trying to go. Maybe you should call someone to come and get you," I suggested as my eyes looked around for any sign of other people. But I found no one. The street was completely empty except for the stranger and me. He took a step closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't have a phone," he said. "Please, I just need a little help." Something in his voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and now I was sure that the least he really wanted was my help. I instinctively pulled away from him and said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you," stepping back and turning to walk away and continue on my way. But then he grabbed my arm. He was a big man, and he grabbed me tightly. I could feel the panic climbing up my body. "Please don't go," he said in a low, urgent voice. But I released my arm and started walking faster. My mind was racing. I could hear his footsteps behind me getting closer, but I dared to look back. I just kept walking very, very fast. "Wait," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty street. "I just need your help." At that moment, I broke into a run, no longer in the mood to disguise my dread. I ran as fast as I could, but I could hear the sound of his heavy footsteps pounding the pavement as he ran after me. I didn't know where I was going. I was practically running blind. I just knew I had to get away from this guy as fast as possible. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose him, but this street was even darker than the previous one with only a couple of street lights on. I could hear him approaching fast. I could literally hear his breathing hitching right behind me, so I knew I had to do something, and fast. I saw a house with a light on, and without a second thought, I ran to the door, banging on it frantically. "Somebody please help me," I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. Fortunately, the door opened, and an old woman greeted me. "Why?" Died with surprise. "What's going on?" she asked, looking past me to the dark street. "Please, let me in. Someone is chasing me," I pleaded as I looked around for any sign of the man. She stepped aside very quickly, and I immediately ran inside, closing the door behind me. I could hear her footsteps pause outside, and then it was silent. I held my breath, waiting. The woman looked at me with concern and asked me, "Are you okay? Who was that man?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know. He said he was lost, but something was wrong with him," I said with my voice cracking. She nodded and led me into the living room, where I collapsed on the couch. "You're safe now," she said. "We'll call the police." I nodded, feeling a little more relieved, but still nervous. The rest of the night was a blur. The police came and took my statement, but the guy was long gone. They said they would look for him, but I didn't feel confident that they would actually find him. I never knew who he was or what he wanted. And honestly, I'm glad I never got to find out. The whole situation was left completely inconclusive. But I knew I had been lucky. I'm sure if I hadn't run when I did, I might not be here to tell this story. This may be something unusual that happened to me not too long ago when I was out walking at night, trying to complete my steps. I'll explain. I have a wellness tracker, and I try to walk at least 10,000 steps a day. Occasionally, I may increase that amount, but 10,000 steps is standard. Most of the time, I am able to complete this goal during the day, depending on what I am doing. But there are times when I am forced to go for a walk at night in order to complete it. I usually get there effortlessly, but sometimes I have to push myself a little harder. This story takes place on one of the days when I didn't have that many steps, even though it was nighttime, probably 9:00 p.m., and I had only completed about 5,000 steps. I went outside for a moment and realized that the weather was really nice, so I decided to go for a walk to complete my steps. At first, I wasn't sure walking at that time of night was a good idea, but in the end I chose to do it. My house is in a beautiful but ordinary place, a quiet street in a neighborhood with a lot of houses. There are also many other streets similar to mine, and it's quite a big neighborhood, that's for sure. I left my house and started walking down the driveway towards my street. It was a quiet night, and no one else was walking the streets, just me at this time. I walked to the end of my street and then down to the next one. I didn't really have a precise range as to when I was walking, so to speak. My intention was to simply walk down adjacent roads until I got to about 8,000 ps or so, and then I would return, estimating that by the time I got home, I would be over 10,000 paces, or exceptionally close. I was walking down another road that was close to mine when I took note of the car turned onto it. I didn't think about anything in particular. I just pulled to the side of the road, as there were no sidewalks to walk on. I noticed that the approaching car was driving very slowly. It had to be going less than 10 km per hour, really very leisurely. This seemed a bit unusual and made me a little uneasy, but not afraid. Not at that moment. I was walking in the direction of the car and saw that it was heading towards me. For an instant, I felt a little uneasy because of the slowness with which it was coming. But then the car passed me, and I didn't bother to see who was driving. It just passed me, and then turned onto the next road, so I kept walking. I got to the end of this road too, and continued on to the next one, but when I was almost halfway down the road, I saw the same car again, still driving gradually, but a little faster than the previous time. This time it was driving in the same direction as me. It came up behind me and passed me again. I didn't see who he was driving this time either, but it did cause me some curiosity because now he was on a different street. Why would he be driving around the neighborhood? Was he looking for an address and not entering it? I ignored the issue again and walked up one more street until I reached my 800 paces, and at that point I chose to turn around and go back to my house. But as I was walking back, I saw the same car once again. It was strange as the lights were off, and the car was driving in the same direction I was walking once again, and was moving very slowly behind me. I was waiting for the car to pass me, but it did not. After a moment, I looked behind me and felt a certain shiver as I saw that the car was following me, driving at almost the same speed at which I was walking. It wasn't right behind me, but it was at a close distance. I was getting really nervous because this was suspicious. When I should have reached the end of the road, I turned onto the next one. The street where I live was just one street over from that one, but then I saw that the car took exactly the same route as me and continued behind me. Now I didn't know what to do. I started walking a little faster, and when I got a little further down that road with the car still following me, I turned around and looked at it. Then the car stopped too. I continued to stand there for a few moments, and the car also stopped in the same place. Neither of us were moving. I still couldn't see who was driving that car because it was dark, and the car was a bit distant. Besides, had the lights off, so I couldn't distinguish anyone at that moment. Suddenly, the car started backing up, but at some point shortly after it stopped, turned completely around, and drove away. I didn't waste a moment and started walking quickly back to my house. I was anticipating that at any moment the car would pass me on the road and follow me again, but it didn't. I didn't know what his intention was, but I didn't know what his intention was. I didn't know what his intention was, but I didn't need to. I started my way back home, trying to shorten the distance. This time, instead of walking, I started running. I don't like running, but I felt it was necessary, and because of that I made it home much faster than I would have if I had walked. I can't describe to you the feeling of relief I had when I finally entered the house and closed the door behind me. I couldn't help but wonder who was in that car and what exactly was they doing. But the story doesn't end there. An hour after I returned home, I was casually walking towards my living room when suddenly something caught my attention from the window. I walked over and noticed a car parked inside the covered parking lot. Its lights were off, but I recognized it immediately anyway. It was the same car that had been following me earlier. What was that car doing parked in my house? And how the hell did it know where I lived? The car was right there inside the garage. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside or not. I really hoped not, but just seeing that car parked in my garage was enough. It was absolutely creepy. I walked to the switch in the living room and turned on the lights outside the driveway, and less than 10 seconds later, I heard the car's engine start, and even with the lights off, it drove out of my garage and disappeared down the street. I was happy it was gone, but I was afraid it would come back. So I checked the window a few more times that night, but the car never returned. However, since that night, I have never gone for another walk at that time, and fortunately I have never seen the car again either. I have asked myself a lot of questions about it. Who was driving the car, and why was it chasing me? How did it know where I lived, and why did they pull into my driveway? I don't have any of these answers, but I'm glad I never ran into this car. Music again. This took place almost 2 years ago. I was 26 years old then and visiting Washington. It was a vacation of sorts, as I was visiting my then fiancée, who we'll call Elena for the sake of this story. She had just passed a bachelor's degree in college, and I traveled from Florida to attend her promotion. However, because her entire family would be attending the event, she asked me to come a week early so we could spend some time alone together. So I said why not, and booked a flight that would arrive exactly a week before the rest of her family. I booked a hotel room for the occasion, and she stayed with me during this time at the hotel event. Yuli, we decided we wanted to get out and explore some of the nearby historic sites Washington has to offer. I had never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest right away. We called an Uber to pick us up, and once we arrived at our destination, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sights from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument. Congress was a very fun and exciting experience for me, as I had missed going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Elena at the time seemed to really enjoy my interest in them and made a couple of jokes during the tour, but we really had a great time after. We finally decided we had had enough walking and were ready to head back to the hotel. We used the Uber app again to request a ride. We had used it before to get there and had no problems, so we decided to use it again for the return trip. Elena made the request on her phone while I sat under a shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we had done and could feel that I was ready to go back to the hotel for a long nap. Finally, Finn, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us. Sarah mentioned to me that this must be our Uber, so I stood up and followed her to the car. She opened the back door and got in, asking the driver, "Hey, are you our Uber?" The driver nodded his head without saying anything, and then I followed her to the car, closing the door behind me. As I looked back, I realized how foolish we were, as we should have asked for the driver's name and verified it on the app. But in my defense, I didn't have access to any of this myself, as Elena was the one who had made the request on her phone, so none of these concerns occurred to me at the time. As we both sat in the back seat of the car, which was a great-colored van, the driver didn't say a word. It seemed a little strange to me. Any other Uber driver would at least greet us once and confirm our names and the address he was supposed to take us to, but this guy, nothing at all. The vehicle started moving without the driver saying half word to any of us other than that brief nod he had given Elena. I realized how strange it was, but I was tired and really didn't feel like trying to engage with the man myself. So I looked back and just closed my eyes, but a few moments later, I felt a couple of taps on my arm. After what felt like only 5 minutes into the ride, I opened my eyes and looked at Elena. She didn't speak to me, but I could see that the expression on her face was one of great concern, and it made me wonder what exactly it was that she was worried about. She then pointed to her phone and showed me the route the Uber would take us back to our hotel. As I looked at her screen, it didn't take me long to realize we were going in the opposite direction. I then looked back at Elena and could see the color in her face fade. A few seconds later, a notification popped up on her phone saying that our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. The photo that appeared on Elena's phone did not match the driver of the van, and at that moment my heart sank into the pit of my stomach. I knew then that we had gotten ourselves into a situation I never thought we would be in. I slowly looked toward the driver, but said nothing. I didn't know what this man's intentions were or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out at that moment. I knew I had to get us both out of the van as soon as possible. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and that we would do it, and wished he would leave us right where we were. It was an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man we didn't know. He looked at me in the rear view mirror, and that was the first real recognition of me since we got in the vehicle. He just stared at me without saying a word for what seemed like minutes, but was probably only about 10 seconds. But the thing is that during that time, he didn't stop the van and didn't say anything to me in response. He just kept driving, as if I hadn't said anything to him. My patience had worn thin at this point, and I knew that whatever this man had planned for us was not good, so I did the only thing I could think of at that moment. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pocket knife I always carried with me, put the blade near his neck, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "We know you're not the Uber. I don't know what your plan is here, but I have a knife, and if You don't stop right now, I'm going to slice your neck. Your call. The driver's eyes quickly glanced at me again in the rear view mirror, and I knew he could see me clutching the knife in my hand. At that moment, he slammed on the brakes and quickly stopped the van. Then I heard the doors open and Elena, and I didn't waste a single second to get out as fast as we could from the car. When we were both outside, the man sped away. Seeing that the guy was out of sight down the road, we quickly took a moment to collect ourselves as Elena was having a panic attack, and I was still trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. When she had recovered a bit, Elena quickly pulled out her phone and answered our actual Uber driver, informing him of our location and asking if he wouldn't mind picking us up. The Uber driver arrived a few minutes later, and this time we made sure he was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and then he informed us of something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. He told us that recently there had been multiple instances where people were impersonating Uber drivers in that area, as it was easy to find many tourists around there who wouldn't think twice about getting into a car thinking it was an Uber or it. The guy told us that we were very lucky to have gotten out of that car, as in several of the cases people had disappeared, and it was still not very clear what fate they would have suffered. Elena and I looked at each other, understanding how close we were to having been victims of who knows what kind of criminal. Our Uber dropped us off at the hotel, and we quickly reported this incident to the local police. We gave them the description of the unknown driver and the van he was driving. The police told us they would call us when they had more information, but we never heard back from them, so I guess the man was never caught or found. That worries me, because he could still be out there doing this to other people. Again, I realized how stupid we had both been for not checking the vehicle before we got into it. The Uber driver was so right. We were really lucky to get out of that situation unscathed. I will never forget the night this happened. It had happened that I had stayed late at work to finish a project, and when I finally left the office it was after midnight. My office is downtown, which is usually full of people all the time, but it was pretty quiet at that time of night. I lived close enough to walk home from work. It was about a 15-minute walk, so I decided to walk so I could also stretch my legs a bit, as I had many hours of sitting. Fortunately, that night the weather was cool and the streets were clear, which was also a bit unusual, probably because it was a Tuesday. The streets were so empty that the only sound that accompanied me was that of the wind blowing and the occasional passing car. As I started my walk home, I felt a little uneasy about such stillness, but I thought I was being paranoid and shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. I had always been a little nervous, especially after watching horror movies the previous weekend. At that time, I watched The Conjuring with some friends, so I thought it was just residual fear. I kept walking, trying to concentrate on getting home. The street lights were not very bright, which made the night seem even darker than usual. I passed by the closed stores, and it felt a little creepy to see their dark windows. I was used to walking around this place in the daylight, when these streets are full of life, and the bustle is almost deafening. But at night it's something very different. I told myself to stay calm, that there was nothing to fear here. But 10 minutes into my walk, as I was entering my neighborhood, I noticed a car driving slowly behind me. I didn't think much of it at the time, as this is a quiet neighborhood, and sometimes people drive slowly when they are looking for an address. But this was somewhat unusual, as while I kept walking, the car continued to follow me at the same slow pace. I looked over my shoulder, trying to get a better look, and it was a beat-up old sedan with tinted windows, making it impossible to see who was inside. I quickened my pace a bit, hoping the car would pass me by, but it didn't. It stayed right behind me, moving just behind me. It stayed right behind me, moving at the same speed. I was feeling a little nervous at this point, but I told myself to stay calm, that it was probably just a coincidence, maybe The driver was lost or waiting for someone. I decided to turn the next corner, taking a slightly longer route home, just to see if the car would follow me. As I rounded the corner, I took another look back. Then my heart started pounding like a tabor when I saw the car also turn and still following me. Now I was really starting to freak out. I knew I had to do something, but my mind was racing, and I couldn't think straight. I remembered that there was a 24-hour convenience store a few blocks ahead. I figured if I could get there, I would be safe, so I started walking faster, almost jogging. Now the car kept pace. Its engine was a real low rumble in the quiet night, and when I was only a block from the store, without giving me time to react, the car suddenly accelerated and stopped right next to me. Then the passenger window rolled down, and I could see a man inside. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled down over his eyes and almost shouted at me, "Hey, need a ride?" His voice was rough and unfriendly. I shook my head and kept walking, not even bothering to respond, but my heart was pounding hard in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The car slowed down to match my pace again, and the man continued to stare at me. I was almost to the store when the car accelerated again, this time stopping on the sidewalk, right in front of me. And suddenly the man got out and leaned against the car, almost blocking my path. He was tall and burly, and there was something really creepy about the way he stood there casually waiting for me. "Come on, just get in the car," he said with a somewhat ghoulish grin spreading across his face. "It's not safe to walk alone at night, kid." I was 23 at the time, but I'm small and pretty skinny, so I've always looked a lot younger than I really am, and I guess this guy thought I was some teenager. Honestly, judging by the way he looked, the predatory look he was giving me, and the twisted smile he had on his mouth, this guy had all the makings of a pedophile. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I felt paralyzed with fear. Now my eyes were fixed on the bright lights of the convenience store, only a few feet away. Then the man took a step towards me, and it was at that moment that panic snapped me out of my paralyzed state, and I ran as fast as my legs would carry me down the last stretch of street to the store. I burst through the doors like a bullet, out of breath and completely terrified. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up in surprise. "Are you all right?" she asked with concern in her voice. "There's a man outside," I gasped, pointing toward the door. I didn't even get to finish the sentence because she immediately rounded the counter and locked the door, then picked up the phone to call the police. I watched from the window as the man stood by his car for a moment, then went back inside, started it up, and drove away down the road in front of the store, disappearing into the night. The police arrived a few minutes later and took my statement, but I knew that chances of them finding the man were slim to none, because in the midst of my shock, it didn't occur to me to take the license plate number. I thanked the cashier for her help and waited for the officer who offered to take me home after this incident. I have never walked at night from work again. In fact, I feel a series of anxiety when walking on the street, even in broad daylight. Music. I walk in city parks all the time. The city where I live is quite large, and I have lived here for a long time. I am a big fan of hiking, and therefore I like walking and biking a lot, but mostly walking, so I can say that I have walked almost every corner of the city, and numerous times. When this happened, it was evening, and I was walking home from my job where I covered the night shift. I had bought my takeout dinner at a 24-hour restaurant that was close to where I work, which was only 10 minutes from my L-Soft. Since it was nighttime, things were reasonably quiet on the streets. There were still a decent amount of other people out, but I chose to walk an easy route through one of the parks that was nearby. The parks were almost continuously much quieter when it was dark. However, this was a route I didn't use to take very often, but that day I was really in a hurry to get home. As expected, on the way through the park, there were lots and lots of trees. It was a small forest along a good stretch, and some open grassy areas, seating and tables scattered in various places. I would possibly have an 8 or 10 minute walk through the park. And except for a couple of girls I saw walking towards the exit a moment ago, the place seemed to be completely deserted. That's why I felt quite uneasy when suddenly I started to hear a sound like footsteps, but of someone, but rather of many people, or something very big, as it was like rustling of branches and leaves. There was an expanse of thick forest on both sides of the road at that moment, and it sounded as if a huge creature was right inside it. I thought it could be some animal that was inside the thick forest, or even a group of animals, like monkeys or something. But this was unusual since, first of all, there must have been a lot of them, and as far as I knew, these are not that active at night. However, it could also be people. But the thing is that this sounded like a lot of feet had moved in the forest, but not at a very close distance, but a little deeper. I looked up and saw some clearings and the branches moving, but I didn't see who or what had caused the commotion at all. I kept walking and pondered what that could be. It didn't seem normal for a huge creature to be in this section of the forest. Although I tried to calm myself by thinking that maybe it was all a product of the wind, I kept walking, but now picking up the pace a bit. I really wanted to get out of that section of the forest fast, but about 2 or 3 minutes later, I started to hear footsteps behind me. This could be heard about 100 ft away, but the more I listened, the closer they seemed to get. I turned to see who it was, but I couldn't see anyone as it was quite dark, and this person was coming from a distance where I still couldn't make them out of the trees. However, I began to feel really worried when I started to hear footsteps approaching rapidly, as if whoever was on the path behind me had sped up the pace to catch up with me. And these were heavy and loud footsteps, like the footsteps of a man in boots. I quickly looked over my shoulder to see who was there, and although I still could not make out well, I could corroborate that it was a man. This was a rather tall-shouldered man who walked looking down and seemed to be wearing a long coat. But what really alarmed me is that I could now tell he was about 50 ft behind and continuing to approach. At that moment, I knew I had to speed up El Paso even more, as I still had quite a way to go to get out of the park. The good thing is that just across the street from the next exit of the park, there was a bus stop that was quite busy and almost always full of people at all hours. I started walking even faster, almost to the point of jogging, but then I noticed that the person behind me also picked up the pace and was now only about 30 ft behind me. I realized that this was not casual at all. This person had actually been following me and was getting closer and closer to me. I had no idea what his intention was, but I was absolutely sure that it would be no good. So I stopped stalling and started running, and guess what? He started running too. As I told you, the man was quite tall, so with every stride he was getting closer and closer, no matter how fast he was running. At one point, I looked back again to check how far away he was, as I could hear his footsteps very close to me. Then I realized that he was now only about 10 to 15 ft away, but fortunately I was already at the final stretch of the park and could see the exit right in front of me. At that point, I was really exhausted, but the adrenaline helped me reach the exit before the man reached me. Once I got out of the park, I kept running to the bus stop where there were about 4 or 5 people, and only there I stopped for a second to breathe. It was then when I looked towards the entrance of the forest, and I could see the man coming out of there looking directly in my direction. For an instant we made eye contact and held each other's gaze for several seconds. His expression was like that of a hunter who had just missed his prey. I was still not quite out of his reach, but I was on the other side of the street, so if he wanted to chase me again, I would have a chance to run and get lost between the buildings. At that moment, the man looked behind him, and it was then when I could see a group of people coming out of the forest at a trot, and I realized that these were the footsteps I had been hearing when I was halfway through the tour. What I did not understand very well was where this man had come from, if he had been following me specifically, or was simply in the middle of the park waiting for a victim to pass, because if I was sure of something, is that this guy did not have any good intentions as I watched these people leave the park. The man looked both ways, but instead of crossing the street, he walked down the street on his side of the sidewalk, and I didn't take my eyes off him until he was lost down the road. After that, all I wanted was to get to the safety of my loft as quickly as possible, so I decided to jog there. And as soon as I got there, I locked doors and windows. I couldn't believe I was about to be trapped by a weirdo. I never knew who that man was or what his intentions really were, but that was the last time I walked home from work at night. And it was also the last time I encountered that guy a long, long time ago, before the internet existed, or rather became popular. I worked at a very popular pizza place in my town. I was only 17 years old at the time, and I really loved this job since the work environment was very good. That is, I not only got along very well with my co-workers, but also with my superiors during my shift. There was a waitress my age who was really cute and charming. Her name was Brittany, and just like me, this was her first job, and she was a senior in high school. We both worked the night shift, but she didn't have a car or a bike, so she mostly walked to work, and other times some other co-workers would give her a ride home. After her shift was over, we usually worked from 6:00 p.m. until the pizzeria closed around 10 p.m., leaving usually around 11:00 p.m. After cleaning up often, I would walk her home on the nights she wasn't biking to work, but sometimes she would even hitchhike home if no one could give her a ride. She was quite fearless, but she always had pepper spray and a small knife in her purse, just in case. On a busy Friday night, we finished the post-shift cleanup up around midnight. We were the only two left on the premises other than the owner, who was in the office counting cash drawers and cataloging sales receipts. Remember, this was before computers, so this had to be done with an adding machine and pencils. I rode my bike that day as the weather was very nice outside. For the first time in weeks, the owner said she would take Brian if I waited until the bookkeeping was done. This would be about an hour or so. But Britt decided not to wait and said she would just take a ride home. We both tried to talk her out of that, and I told her that I couldn't even get her a ride in an hour anyway, but she just laughed and said, "Hey, I'm a pretty girl with great legs. Someone is going to stop. But you know I have a defense kit, so no one better try to be smart about it." Honestly, I don't think her knife would have cut an apple, but it was something, and the pepper spray she used would at least be effective. I walked her outside, and we talked for a while in the parking lot. She joked about sitting on the handlebars of my bike and saying she could ride at home. Of course, that wasn't an option, so we both laughed. I offered to stay with her until she got a ride, but she said no thanks, and that no one would stop if they saw her with a guy on a bike, as it would have made them suspect we were up to something. So we said goodbye and went in separate directions. On Monday, which was the day our day started, I arrived at work on time, as I did every day, but Britt did not show up for work. This was very unusual, as she was never late for work or missed a shift without calling in. A couple of days later, her mother frantically walked into the shop asking if her daughter had gone to work. It was then that we learned that she had not returned home or called in since Friday night. This was also extremely rare, as according to her mother, if she was late or staying somewhere, she always called and notified her. We all freaked out a little when we heard this. That same day, her mother finally reported her missing, and the police came over and questioned both myself and the owner about that Friday night. The fact that the owner was a middle-aged woman and me being a goofy 17-year-old kid didn't place as much as possible suspects or even persons of interest. After the police left, the taunting began. The restaurant workers can be a tough bunch, especially the kitchen staff, and most have a very black sense of humor. At least the ones I worked with. They started joking about me kidnapping Britt, And such this continued for the next few shifts, and things didn't help when it became apparent that I was the last person to see her alive. The cops came back to the pizzeria and questioned me again, and also my parents, which of course freaked them out. Finally, a week after she disappeared, a co-worker was really giving me a big headache about it, telling the waitresses not to go too close to me or they might disappear. I finally had enough of his offhanded comments. After he sarcastically asked me where I buried the body there, I exploded and shot back at him, saying the first thing that came to mind: at the bottom of the damn lake. Do you want to join her? Everyone who heard this exclaimed in unison a big ooh yeah. I put her on damn handlebars, rode up to the dam, and threw her in there. Now shut up and leave me alone. At that point, the manager came out and scolded us both for acting like stupid kids in her verbatim words that calmed everyone down. He ended up calling me out on a few adjectives under his breath, and we finally went back to our duty. 2 days later, we learned that Brittany's body washed up in the reservoir. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Her body was tied to a rock, and for that reason had not surfaced. Needless to say, the cops were much more interested in me now after that sarcastic comment in the restaurant, where I unknowingly predicted almost exactly how she was killed. The cops had my parents take me to the station and questioned me again without a lawyer present back then. Unless an arrest was imminent, a minor could be questioned without one, as long as a parent was there. Since the dam was a good 20-minute drive from the restaurant, I was eliminated as a suspect. They made an arrest shortly thereafter, a man they had suspected in a similar incident the year before. The guy confessed to both murders in exchange for a life sentence. Obviously, there was no connection between me and him, but I still felt teary when I went to Brittany's memorial. I remember just sitting in the back in silence at that point. Word had gotten out about my morbid joke, which turned out to be true. I did not attend the burial service. I didn't want to upset his family. This story happened when I was 17 years old. I am now 26. This was about 3 years ago. It was a summer night, and I had just finished my shift, working as a retail associate at my local Walmart. I know it's not the best job today, but back then it was pretty decent for a first job at 17. I headed to the bus stop, and when I got there, I pulled out my phone to track the bus and saw that it was 2 hours late. This obviously upset me, as I had to get home, get everything sorted for the next day, and go to bed early to be ready to go to school the next morning. So there was no way in hell I was willing to wait 2 hours for the bus, so I decided to take another way home, walking. I didn't know it at the time, but it was actually a terrible decision, and you'll understand why later. My neighborhood is about a 20 to 30-minute walk, so I sucked it up and started walking home. This area at that time of night was pretty quiet, not many cars on the streets. As I was walking up the sidewalk listening to my music absent-mindedly, I heard a car engine not far behind me. At first, I thought it was just my music, but after removing one of my headphones, I knew that simply wasn't the case. Instead, about 20 feet away, there was a pair of headlights approaching. Without thinking anything of it, I go back to listening to my music, but after a moment, the car finally stops next to me. Now, I was a girl planning to major in auto mechanics, as I've always had a great fascination with cars, so it wasn't hard to identify both the year and model of the car next to me. It was a 2004 Honda Accord, and inside was a man I'd never seen before, waving at me. I turned to him and gave him a friendly wave back, but only to be polite. Then I see him gesture for me to take out my headphones, and when I do, he starts asking me what my name was, and if I knew where Water Creek was. I lived in this town all my life, and not once had I ever heard of a place called Water Creek, but I just assumed it was some neighborhood. But since I knew where it was, I simply apologized and told him I didn't know, and that my name was Sasha. There was a long pause after I told him this, until he asked me for directions to another area that I didn't know the name of. The truth is that all I wanted at that moment was to get home, and frankly, I didn't want to talk anymore, so I lied and told him to go straight and do 2 blocks until I got to the highway. Then he stops for moment confused and asks me if I can get in the car to tell him exactly where it was and that he would pay me an Uber so I could get back. I politely declined and told him I had a curfew and had to get home. However, he persisted and asked me again if I could get in the car with him. I said no once again and walked a little faster so he could get the hint. Fortunately, he understood and then said something along the way, "Have a good night, Sasha." Fortunately, I made it home safely that night, but not without my mom nagging me about how I was out so late and why I didn't call her. My mom is not a night owl by any means and always went to bed early, so I didn't call her to pick me up. I told her I was sorry and headed to my room to get some sleep. This is where things start to get really weird. I was asleep for a few hours when I suddenly woke up to a strange noise coming from outside. I glanced at my phone and it was around 3:30 in the morning. I just sighed to myself, wondering what it was that had woken me up at that hour, and immediately looked out the window. That's when I see the very familiar Honda Accord with someone standing next to it right below my window. "Hey Sarah, you're up there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up," the individual shouted at the top of his lungs, which causes my mother to burst into my room in a panic and start asking me what that was all about. I would like to point out that my mother is ex-military and doesn't take crap from anyone, so when she came into my room she was alert. So I tried to find the words to tell her that there was a man on our property who had been following me. It wasn't verbatim. That's the way I told him, but that's basically how it sounded. Obviously, this was not something that went down well with him, and now he had that scary, annoyed look on his face, and without saying a word to me, he opened my window and started yelling at the man to get the hell out of his house, or I would finish him off. My mom is a tough cookie and doesn't mess around, so when I saw that he wouldn't leave, it gave me the creeps. The man just stood there on my lawn looking out the window like he was waiting for one of us to come down. Then I see my mom run out to her room, and when she comes back with the gun in her hand. She pulled me away from the window, opened it, and without hesitation started pointing the gun directly at the man, at the same time telling him that she is going to count to 3 and warning him that he better get the hell out before the count is over. 1, 2, and before Mom pronounced the number 3, the guy, probably understanding that she was not playing, jumped in the car in a jiffy and drove burning tires out of the house. As soon as the guy left, my mother called the police. They arrived a few minutes later, and together with her began to patrol the streets looking for the guy. But unfortunately, they did not find him. It wasn't until a few days later when we received the news that a girl a little older than me had disappeared in the area and was found dead in a field almost 5 miles from where she was last seen. The local media reported the news, and when we saw the person responsible, I almost threw up. Yes, you guessed it. It was the same person who tried to lure me into his car, the same person who was at my house that night. Fortunately, he was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Some say he had $100,000 bond in his name that his family ended up paying, but that has not been confirmed or denied. I sincerely hope he's still locked up in prison, and if he's not, I hope he's suffering in some way. It's the least a monster like that deserves.